Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming and attending today. It's November 15th, 3 o'clock, and I'm glad to have you around. We're going to go through this session in about 25-30 minutes. We know you're a busy day. If you want to submit some questions, you can do so on the screen, and I look forward to going through it with you. And at the end of the presentation, I'm going to have an offer for attendees that I'll share with you shortly. So today we're going to talk about external DNS vulnerabilities, the risks in mitigation, and how you deal with that. I hope you find it of value. We're going to do a number of different items. My name is Peter LaMantia. I'm the CEO of Authentic Web. I've been operating this business now for about 10 years, and I'll explain a little bit of the journey of the business as we go, and we'll go from there. So as an agenda, we're going to give an introduction, just a little bit about Authentic Web, and then about the DNS problem itself. We'll talk about that problem and why external DNS hygiene is an absolute critical function for the modern enterprise. We'll look at the root cause, what's happening inside the enterprise to cause this challenge, and then what are some of the specific domain and DNS hygiene risks, and what will happen, and what are the business impacts if this doesn't get addressed. And then I'll close off with sharing how some leading enterprises are modernizing to get and keep control. So a little bit about us. So we're an enterprise DNS security system. So we're a technology company primarily. We are a corporate domain registrar. This business formed in 2013-14 as I used to struggle with domains. We owned about 1,000 domains at an F1000 I was working at. We were also a registrar, and I was president of that registrar. And every quarter, I would receive a list of domain names that need to be renewed and whether or not I wanted to renew them. And I'd always say to people, well, what's running on these things? Reality is we'd have to get very specialized expertise in the IT side to review it. It wasn't worth it, so we just renewed it. No one reviewed the zone files, and this domain space just kept growing. So we've built tools to help companies manage domains, DNS, and certificates. Rather than using forms, spreadsheets, and support tickets, we've automated it. And clients find that extremely valuable and much easier. So enough about us. Let's talk about this problem. So why is DNS security so critical? So DNS, most of you here, I think, are technology people. You understand that it's a critical technology that underpins the entire digital business. And virtually every cyber incident starts with the DNS. Why? Because the DNS is the public network. It's used by bad actors to go out and understand what you have live, discover endpoints that may not be secure. So it's critical to lock it down with policies and then systems to enforce that. And critically as well, you need to make it easy for teams. If you don't make it easy, it's simply not going to happen. So when we talk about the DNS hygiene mission, we're really talking about the objective of how to protect the business to keep your customers safe. And that is to ensure that your brand remains trusted, that people feel secure going to your brand or domain names related to your brand. And how do you do that? You got to make DNS management easy for the IT and digital teams, giving them tools to give them control, visibility, and automation. And the result of that, of empowering these teams to get and keep control, you can reduce your enterprise risks and the costs related to teams working with old systems to try to manage this area. Let's face it, teams today have old technologies like propeller airplanes to manage this area, and it's just not going to work. So the problem itself is related to enterprise DNS hygiene. It's frankly a mess. And the brand is exposed to these hidden risks because you do not have control, visibility, and automation. And the life cycle of a domain name requires you to understand what's going on in the domain and the DNS records from day one through until that domain might be retired. So just very simply, on day one, you register a new domain name. You set up some records, a start of authority record, an MX record, maybe an A record, etc. So that's simple enough. One domain, nothing else needed. But then the problem comes with the life cycle of that domain. Over time, complexity starts to increase by day, by week, by month, by year. And you probably have domains that you've had live for decades now. And when you know that in those zone files, they're a complete mess because people keep adding new records into the zone file, but they tend not to remove them. And that is a control gap disaster in the making. So we've done a lot of audits for different companies, and it always reveals a similar thing. So I thought what I'd do is I'd share just a couple of examples. I wanted just to share some of the evidence that we see on what's going on with enterprise managed DNS, and also share some of the results that we got around SPF and DMARC. So we ran these audits on these 11 different companies, and highlighted here are the number of managed DNS services that are live. That's an impossible situation for IT guys to understand what's going on without change management control, without visibility to understand who's changing what and when. So there's an internal perception of risk and avoidance on the need to consolidate. But look at the number of managed DNS services they have live. Who has access? Who's changing what? And the implication there is it's just impossible for teams to have oversight and controls. And a lack of change controls increases this risk exposure as the DNS zone file footprint just becomes bigger. So there's a need there to consolidate DNS to enforce change management, ensure security, regulatory compliance, and external threats by rogue internal actors, maybe not malicious, but just errors or omissions. These things need to be addressed, and you need to know when someone makes a change. The second one that I want to share is SPF and DMARC. So SPF and DMARC record adoption is low. Now, most organizations have it set up on flagship domains that you use, and most think that they need to set it up where you have mail as well. But SPF is dealing with sending policies. So if you don't have an SPF record on a domain name and a related DMARC record, nefarious actors can use your domains and use them for phishing to exploit some sort of vulnerability or to impose malware. And this is a serious issue for companies. So when you look at these numbers and you look at this one financial services institution at 51.2%, look, that's pretty good relative to peers. But that means there's still 49% of their domain names, approximately 1,300 domain names that do not have an SPF record. Those domains can be used for phishing. So you need to establish a security policy on SPF and DMARC. So that's just a couple of examples. We also did audits related to CNAMEs with redirects and a number of other pieces. But it just gives you a sense that even very sophisticated organizations have problems in this area. There's also some DNS research, security research to back a lot of this up. So 2 slides here. The first slide is related to what we see in the news. And the scale and severity of DNS compromises just continues to escalate. We've seen it in the news over the last few years, whether it's DNS hijacking or a takeover of domains because there were no SOA records. It's become so severe that I think it was in 2020, the Department of Homeland Security and the National Cybersecurity Center in the UK issued warnings to large enterprises to get control of your DNS. And last year I saw a great report from IDC. IDC put out a report that talked about the changes in the attack vectors and the types of attacks and the severity of those attacks over the last year. There's 2 types here. One is the inbound threat, where DNS and exfiltration may be in place, or where someone tries to get command and control. But there's also the threat of domains and how you've managed your own resource records. So companies have suffered more diverse types of attacks, and cyber criminals are using the DNS to exploit the DNS protocol itself. Now, you may know as an expert in IT, the DNS is not secure, and that's by design. It allows anybody to get to an endpoint on the internet. But the issue comes in with the misconfigurations or the lack of setting up different security protocols and change management systems to be able to manage this area. So what's going on inside the enterprise? And this, I think, will really tell the tale. So I like this next slide because it really talks about how easy it used to be. Back in the 90s, when you got your first domain, simple process. You have a domain, you have a registrar, you have one name server, you have some C-level and an IT person to set up what you needed to set up. Not a problem, all set, and you could even scale to there to 10, 20, 30 domains. But fast forward now, 25, 30 years, and companies own hundreds or even thousands of domain names. They have multiple registrars and multiple, even more DNS providers as a result of various reasons from IT preferences or mergers and acquisitions. And importantly now, as business has become more digital, everybody in the organization is a stakeholder. So from the brand folks, the IP attorneys, the IT group, the infrastructure folks, the InfoSec, everybody has a hand in it. But the problem is that across a large organization, it's relatively unowned as a holistic view on how well we're doing in managing our domains, our DNS, and our certificates. This next slide is a great graphic that I've used with dozens of different IT leaders that really talks about what the root cause here. And it kind of boils down to silos. Silos both for systems, people silos, organizational silos, working across large organizations and different entities, and then the process itself that is very much manual. So when I share this, everybody always says, yeah, that's what we do. And that's why we're here talking to you. So when you need to get a new domain, or you need to change a domain or do something to it, you'll use a ticketing system, maybe use email or forms. That information goes to an individual who needs to act on that ticket or that request. They will enter that information into one of more registrars. They will then need to turn that up live. So then it goes over to the IT or infrastructure guys to set it up on one or more different of the DNS services that you have live out on the internet. And then there's DNS scanning. So, a lot of companies do have some systems in place to do some rudimentary scanning on their domains, but typically it's only done on the flagship domains. And flagship domains are only one part of the problem. So if they find something that they need to address, they'll then request that gets changed in the system. And then there's security policies that are typically disconnected and hard to enforce. So if you've got multiple different DNS providers, you've got a manual process, and then you've got another silo of the InfoSec guys who say, hey, here's our policy. How do you properly enforce that with all these different systems out there? It's just frankly impossible. And then zone reviews. So this is when typically something happens, something goes wrong, and someone in leadership states we need to review all our zone files. So you could have a zone file on a core domain with hundreds, thousands, or even tens of thousands of records. And how are you going to do that? So you're going to get an IT person to go in, look at all of these settings, and try to make a determination whether or not something should be live if it's configured correctly. Typically, that ends up with a whole bunch of questions that no one knows how to answer, and something stalls, and then suddenly there's another priority. So zone reviews have not happened, and zone files have simply been allowed to expand over time. I think of it, and I did a webinar on this one around equating a zone file like the kitchen junk drawer. When you first get it, it's nice and clean, a few bobby pins, a few staplers, etc. But then over time, it just gets worse and filled up with junk. And that really is the state of the zone file and the DNS hygiene problem. And then lastly, there's the dreaded Excel to try to do portfolio reviews and understand what you should be owning. I always tell our clients that they probably have too many domain names, but what they need to do is manage less, but manage them better and ensure that they're secure and compliant. So domains in DNS are extremely vulnerable to compromise. We've seen that in some of the news articles, we've seen that in some of the research, and we know that inherently, that there are a lot of external threats out there that bad actors are seeking to compromise your organization, whether it's social engineering, taking advantage of a CA compromise, and then following that up with different types of attacks, a man-in-the-middle attack, the dreaded DNS hijack, domain hijack, or domains being used for phishing. So this happens constantly. You don't hear about it in the news all the time because no company wants to share that. But the problem is it just persists because it's really hard for IT to get and keep control over this area. So why is that? It's a whole bunch of internal causes. So when you think about the system silos, the manual processes, the policies and whether or not they're being enforced or not, who has access, people using shared logins, where's the oversight, do we have change management control, and of course people turn over who leave with institutional knowledge. So this manual process in relationship to thinking of a large organization with multiple operating entities and departments and different teams creates the mess that almost all organizations are in today. So you think about the vulnerability risks and impacts. So why are you exposed? Boil it down. Let's say it's about internal ownership. Who owns this? Who has governance? And then do you have systems in place to oversee that governance, ensure that it's complied with throughout the organization? So what's going to happen? All sorts of bad things can happen, as we know. And I'm sure if you're here today, you've had this happen to you, whether it's a digital outage, someone's taken over an IP address where you have a live DNS record pointing to, and they've impersonated your brand. There's ransomware risk, there's theft of personal identifiable information, credential theft, and of course, we all know about DDoS. So different types of attacks can result in different impacts, whether it's phishing, malware, fraud, credential theft, or straight up digital outages. So as a summary on the enterprise audit side, DNS audits reveal big gaps in DNS hygiene, security, and compliance controls. It's a very difficult area with how people are equipped and how people are set up today. The apex audits that you can do will be indicative of what the rest of your zone file looks like, but it's only the tip of the iceberg. To do a full review of your full zones on all your domain names is really what you need to have in place to understand where you have issues. And research shows that the increase in frequency and the growing business impacts are really important. And those business impacts can relate to all sorts of bad actions or bad impacts for the organization. So customer distrust or churn. If something happens to one of your customers who had put their belief in you and you did not control that, that's a bad outcome. Regulatory compliance fines for not having proper IT controls should an incident occur. And reactive work effort. This is the one that hits everybody the most in the moment that there's an outage that's going on, where all the big brains on network get involved right up to the CISO and the infrastructure leads to work on a problem, to resolve that problem. You also have to involve the client services people, the brand people, the marketing folks to put out messaging. This is just not a good thing. And all of this results to damage to your P&L, to your brand, and potentially your career as well. And again, why it persists? There's a bit of a false belief that DNS is not a threat. But I think you know, because you're here, that that's not true. The lack of ownership is a real thing. There's very much a lack of C-level understanding. Very few people really understand how the DNS works. We just expect it to work just the same way we expect a light bulb to work or the telephone dial tone to work on your phone. There's a complacency here too. There's unseen risks. I don't see it popping up today. But in every external pen test that you've ever had done, you'll look at that report for the high and medium and low problems, and they all start off with a subdomain or a CNAME. So these issues exist because you're pointing and have live records pointing to places that are not effective. And it's messy. I don't want to open it up. Well, the fact that it's messy is the very reason why you do need to open it up, to resolve these and get it under control and put in systems to support that. So how are leading enterprises modernizing? What are they doing to replace that propeller plane? Well, they're doing a number of things to establish a program around these digital assets that represent your intellectual property and your brand. Your digital footprint is dependent upon the DNS. So how do you get and keep control of that? There's 4 points I like to state here, and it's not all systems. The first one is a commitment from leadership. Somewhere in the organization, some leader needs to say, you know what, this is an issue. We've known it's been an issue for 5 years. We've talked about it every year, but we never do anything about it. Well, now's the time to do that. You need to get an audit. Are we exposed today? Where are the vulnerabilities and how can we address those? Then, of course, you need to set up some security policies. What should every domain have in terms of SPF, DMARC? Are you going to set up DNSSEC on your domains? What are all these security policies that you need to put into place? And then, of course, you need systems to be able to control that. Change management system, visibility systems to enforce the compliance with the policy that you've set. And critically, you need to make this easy for teams. It's hard today. It's difficult. You've got domains spread out all over the place. And if you don't make it easy, it's simply not going to work. So obviously, this is something that we work on a lot. So we've actually just released a new service called DNS Inspector. And I'll tell you how this came about. So about 3 or 4 years ago, we started doing audits. So we had these probes that we would run on someone's portfolio. They would run, it would take a day or so for all these probes to run serially. We'd pull back all this data. We'd dump this data to a database. Then we'd go through and we'd organize this data. We'd make sense of this data and then present a report. So that would take us almost a week to do that. But then we kept getting asked for more of these types of reports. And we said, you know what? We need to create a system out of this. So we've created this tool called DNS Inspector that will go out and audit your entire zone files where we can see them and look at both your DNS infrastructure, how many registrars you have live on these domains, where your domains being managed on the DNS, what IP addresses are set up across your entire portfolio, and whether or not you've got secondary DNS in place. And then we look at some of the other things. We look at the HTTP responses. Are they secure? Where are they pointing to? What IP addresses are set up? Are they compliant? And then we flag them, whether or not they're fine or whether or not they've got a security vulnerability that you need to investigate. Do the same thing for redirects, how many hops you have, etc. Lame delegations, dangling CNAMEs. A dangling CNAME is where you have a CNAME set up to a web resource name, but that web resource may no longer be in use. You may have set that up years ago and now it's been turned down. That is the same as an orphaned IP address on an A record. If you're pointing to an IP you don't control, if you're pointing to a web resource that you don't control, those can be taken over by bad actors and impersonate your brand and cause some damage. So in all of this, the principle is to say, okay, how do you make this easy to discover, to investigate, to resolve the issues there, and then verify that with secondary audit? Then, of course, there's the DNS control system. So bringing all of these pieces together in a single system that's simple to use is critical. So what we've done is we've brought workflow together with the DNS, the access controls, DNS security policies, transaction cost accounting for the bean counters, change management, all of these placed into one spot to give your teams better control, visibility, and automation over it. The key here is that it's a single pane of glass to manage everything. And how we've structured this is a control hub. So we integrate down into all the registries in the world. We cover every TLD on the planet, barring a very select few. We plug into DNS providers, and this is the control system that our clients use to manage their entire DNS and digital footprint. So as a summary, how you get more security, compliance, performance, and address the control, visibility, and automation needs. So first of all, you need to understand that the risk is real and the evidence is growing. We all know that the term, it's always the DNS, and that's because it's true. The DNS runs everything, and if something fails on the DNS, you're going to be out. And secondly, the domain lifecycle process today is manual. We see that, we know that. It's painful for IT guys. Everybody hates managing domains in DNS because it's scary. If you do something wrong, you're going to turn something completely down. But there's a way to manage that. And IT lacks the time and tools. So they are the guys that are suffering here. And you need to help them to automate, give them automation and visibility tools to control this space, which really empowers those teams with modernizations to get and keep control. So lastly, I'll just share this. This is a little checklist we have. So if you look at all of these pieces and just think about your own organization and where you are. I'm not going to walk through this, but if this is of interest to you, we'll be posting this up. If you'd like a PDF of this, just shoot me a note and I'll send it over. But you need to go through and just think about where you are in terms of your security and compliance controls and whether or not you have everything in place that you need to have in place. Listen, I hope that was of value. I wanted to keep it just to 30 minutes, knowing everybody's time is really tight. I'll leave you with this. If you have multiple registrars and DNS providers, you've got a problem. You don't have change controls in place. If you can't see the changes that someone might make on the DNS and have be reported on that, you have a problem. If you can't see the risks that are exposed on all of your different records, you also have a problem. And we know it's painful. You need to help your guys here, and we can help there if you like. I also want to make that offer. So DNS Inspector is now available. So I wanted to offer 10 free trials. We need to do limit it to some degree. But if you wanted to send me an email, if you want to learn about that more, I'd be happy to respond to that and give you a demo of the system and show you how that can help you. DNS is dangerous, so you need to get that under control. Just looking here, there's a question here. Can you recommend any of your webinars on the basics of DNS to take a deeper dive? We've done a number of different DNS webinars. If you go into Bright Talk and you see some of those lists, if you don't find what you're looking for, though, just shoot me a note and we can take a deeper dive on that as well. That's a good question. Maybe it says we do need to do one of those very shortly. There's another one here. Where do you see the biggest risks for companies on the DNS? There's a number of things. So I think, I'll boil that down into two. First of all, on the registrar side. So where are your domains today? How many registrars do you have in place? These big retail registrars do a great job for retail customers, but they're not designed for enterprise. And one of the common attack vectors is social engineering, where you're going into a large call center. These guys are so smart. And I've have a relationship with a law firm down in the States. I think they're in Washington, and they're constantly dealing with people that have their domains stolen. So that's one piece of it. The other one is the DNS hygiene. We've shown you. So the example of the orphaned IPs. This is an A record pointing to an IP address that you no longer control. The example would be you've got something that your marketing guys, your digital folks set up on Amazon Web Services. They run a program, it runs its course, they turn down the web service, but your DNS record is still pointing over there. That's an orphaned IP. That IP can be taken over by a bad guy to cause damage to you on your own domain name. I think the other one, so dangling CNAMEs is similar. I talked about that already. The lack of SPF records, it just boggles my mind why people don't set SPF minus all for domains where they have no intention of wanting to receive any emails whatsoever. Those are good questions. Here's one. How can we know if we have the problem? You do have the problem. If you don't have control systems see every change that happens on the DNS, that's a problem. So, obviously, I don't want to be self-serving, but you need an audit. You need an audit to see where you've got that issue. And I hope this trial would be able to offer you that opportunity. Well, listen, I see we've come to the bottom of the hour. I hope all of that was of value to you and you learned something today. This will get posted and you can share it or review it again. If you'd like some additional information, if you'd like to chat about this, just send me an email. I'd be happy to have a discussion. Thanks very much and have a great rest of your day.